If you've ever loved a pet, you know the feeling. They have personalities, emotions. They feel like they have a soul, right? But what does that really mean? And what, if anything, truly separates us from them? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating theological argument that draws a very clear and maybe surprising line in the sand. I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? We look at our pets and we see intelligence. We see real affection. So what is the actual difference? Are we just smarter versions? Or is there something fundamentally different going on? Let's unpack one really powerful theological perspective that tries to answer that exact question. So according to this source material, the key difference isn't about personality, because animals clearly have that in spades. It's about spirituality. The text describes animals as nephesh, which means they're soulish creatures, totally capable of forming deep emotional bonds. But it argues they were created without one crucial thing, an internal moral compass, that innate sense of right and wrong that is just hardwired into humans. Okay, so how does this difference actually play out in the real world? Well, the source starts by looking at what drives us, at our core motivations. And it suggests that while humans and animals are both driven by powerful instincts, the scale of those motivations, well, they're worlds apart. And this slide really lays it all out. On the one hand, you have animal motivation. It's powerful, for sure, but it's also contained. A cat's curiosity is totally focused on its immediate territory. A dog's loyalty is fierce, but it's for its pack, its owner. But then you look at us. Human motivation just seems to have no boundaries. Our curiosity drives us to study galaxies we'll never visit and particles we'll never even see. And this is where it gets even more interesting. We humans will extend our care to complete strangers on the other side of the world, to endangered species we will never ever meet. We even protect inanimate things, like a forest, just because we think it's beautiful. The source claims this all points to a uniquely human desire to connect with something bigger than the material world, a higher power. A drive, it says, that has no parallel in the animal kingdom. So this difference in motivation, it's all building up to what the source considers the ultimate dividing line. It's not just about what drives us, but about a specific capacity that truly and finally sets humanity apart. And here it is. The source argues that the reason our world has so many problems, despite our amazing capacity for good, it all comes down to one uniquely human concept: sin. Now, this isn't just about doing bad things. It's defined as an internal battle, knowing what is right, but feeling a powerful pull to do what's wrong. And that capacity for moral choice, and yeah, moral failure, is presented as the absolute dividing line. Okay, but wait a second. Any pet owner is probably thinking the same thing I am right now. You come home, the trash is all over the floor, and your dog gives you that look. It feels exactly like guilt. But the source actually tackles this head on, and it points to a really fascinating scientific study. So let's break down this experiment by psychologist Alexandra Horowitz. The finding was pretty stunning. That guilty look had absolutely nothing to do with whether the dog actually ate the forbidden treat. It was purely a reaction to being scolded. Obedient dogs who hadn't touched the treat but got scolded anyway showed the guilty look just as much, sometimes even more. It's a submissive response to our anger, not an internal admission that they did something wrong. So if it's not guilt, what about something else? Like, can our pets read our minds or understand our intentions? This brings us to another key psychological concept: theory of mind. It's a fancy term, but it basically just means the ability to understand that other beings have their own thoughts, their own beliefs, their own intentions that are completely separate from yours. A Canadian study really put this to the test. They had one human who was trustworthy and would point to food, and another human who was deceptive and would point to an empty container. Then they compared the dog's performance to just simple inanimate pointers. And the result? The dogs weren't any better at learning to trust the good human than they were at learning which pointer was the correct one. The source's conclusion here is that dogs are absolute masters at reading our body language and our tone, but not our moral character. So if animals don't share our spiritual or moral dimension, then what is their purpose, at least from this theological viewpoint? The source shifts here to argue that these soulish creatures were actually designed, specifically and purposefully, to serve and to benefit humanity. And this table here lays out the three main categories of land mammals that the source identifies from Genesis and Job. It argues that each group was designed with a kind of dual purpose in mind, one that was absolutely essential at the dawn of civilization, and another that's just as critical for us today. Let's dig into each one. First up, the small, short-legged mammals. Think about rodents, hares, things like that. Their thick fur was the perfect high-tech material for early humans. It let them create clothing that was essential for surviving cold climates and migrating all across the planet. That was a huge step in building a global civilization. And what about their purpose today? Well, the source points straight to medicine. Because their DNA is so incredibly similar to our own, rodents are invaluable for research into diseases from leprosy to Alzheimer's. Their super short generation time lets scientists make breakthroughs that would otherwise take hundreds of years. Next up, livestock. Animals like cattle, goats, and horses were literally the engines of early civilization. They provided the muscle to plow the fields, the transportation to build trade routes, and the nutrition to feed growing populations. Without them, organized agriculture and the cities that it spawned, they might never have happened. And finally, the source looks at what it calls wild animals, which in this context means carnivores, like dogs and cats. Their purpose is much more relational. Of course, they offer companionship and loyalty. They serve as guide dogs, therapy animals. But the source also makes this really fascinating point. They mirror our own behavior. They reflect back both our kindness and our cruelty. And in doing so, they teach us about ourselves. And this brings us to the final and frankly the most challenging part of this entire viewpoint. If these creatures were designed so purposefully to help humanity flourish, then how have we treated them in return? The source describes this relationship as a sacred trust, a stewardship that has been betrayed. 50%. According to the source, that's the approximate percentage of all bird and mammal species that have been driven to extinction directly by human activity since we first showed up on this planet. Half of them are just gone. This quote from the source just hits so hard because it captures the tragedy from this theological perspective. It frames extinction not just as some ecological loss, but as the destruction of a specific, purposeful gift. And it's a direct consequence of that uniquely human capacity we talked about earlier, sin and exploitation. And that leaves us with this final, really challenging question. If you accept the premise of this source, that these animals are a divine gift, designed to help us and to bring us joy, then what does it say about us if we fail to take care of that gift? What are the consequences when we fail to be good stewards? It's a profound question that really gets to the very heart of the human-animal divide.